in the mail maybe last week. Yeah, so very, very excited about that. Very, it's surreal to a certain extent, you know. There's so many years of my life, I describe myself as a PhD student. And now I'm like a little, you know, I don't know where my feet are. So, but thank you so much for asking, and thank you so much for celebrating with me, really.
I'm proud of you.
Well, welcome everybody. It is, at least by my computer side, it is 12:01. We're here at the noontime Bible study with Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church. We're so grateful for those of you who are on the Zoom call, and also those of you who are streaming in with our live streaming. Before we jump into the text, we're working with the biblical text of Joshua. We're going to focus on the story of Rahab. And we're also working through this book, Holy Imagination, which is authored by Reverend Dr. Judy Fentress Williams. And today we're going to be working, focusing on pages 71 and 72 of that book. But before we dig in too deeply, before we get carried away with all that we'll chat about, is there somebody who is on the Zoom call who would be willing to open us in prayer today? Hearing none, let me do that.
I don't mind. I'll do it.
Okay. All right, Dr. Bowling, thank you so much.
Good. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Thank you for this day that you have made and that we can rejoice in it. We thank you for the opportunity to come to study, to learn about you, and to learn about ourselves and our relationship with you. Thank you for letting Reverend Michelle come and be the facilitator for us so that we can open our eyes and our minds and our hearts to that you would have us to know. Help us to grow in this discipleship grouping as we learn to look toward the things that you have for us to do as we work out the kingdom's promises. Dear Lord, we thank you that you have a minister, Pastor Lamar and Reverend Dana, that they will be allowed to go on vacation, to enjoy themselves, to rest, to relax, to have a moment of peace and quiet. But bring them back to us safely, dear Lord. And bless this day, everybody that is on the line and their families. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. So I totally dig the story of Rahab. I really get into the story of Rahab, and there's a couple of reasons for that. But the first one has to do with the very beginnings of my faith walk. So some of you already know this, but some don't, that I didn't become a Christian until I was in my mid-20s. And so I didn't grow up in a household that, you know, went to church or talked explicitly about God. Maybe some kind of general understandings of, you know, the way God kind of works in the world. That, you know, when I was a child, I remember my mom pointing to a tree and saying, look at that tree. You know, it's impossible. We couldn't have created that tree. You know, God created that tree, you know, that kind of thing. So it, you know, and on my way back and forth to school, I would pass by churches, and, you know, things like that. But I didn't have any church background. I didn't claim any sort of denomination or religion for myself until my mid-20s. And I remember when I first became a Christian, I was trying to sort out what it meant to be a moral, ethical person underneath this new understanding of, you know, my life as a Christian. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a good Christian? You know, and so this perhaps is not a unique story, but when I first became a Christian, I was just looking for like this or that, this or that, this or that. It was either all 100% the right thing or it was 100% the wrong thing. And I was trying to navigate, you know, what kind of changes I needed in my life and where God was leading me and all that kind of thing, right? So I say all that to say as a backdrop to my introduction to Rahab. So, as I'm coming to my 100% yes or 100% no kind of ethical templates, the idea of lying seems wrong, right? So like, well, don't lie, right? And many of us are coming at that, be like, yeah, of course, don't lie, right? But when it comes down to things where like you say a particular something because you're trying to save someone's feelings, or you say something because you're trying to protect yourself from a particular result or whatever, those are the things where then you have to kind of dig deep inside yourself and say, okay, how important is it for me to hold steadfast to this moral truth for my life, right? And as we're navigating all of that, it's like, of course, I don't want to lie. And then somebody somewhere, was like, oh, you became a Christian, right? Because I became a Christian. And of course, I had like all these folks in my life that weren't Christian, and they were like testing out where my Christianity fell in there, right? And I'm brand new, so I don't even know it's coming. But here it is, right? What about the story of, that prostitute that lied, to save the spies? First of all, I'm like, what? Is that in the Bible? I haven't even got that far yet, but okay, thanks for that. So the pressing kind of existential angst that I had was, okay, whoa, wait a minute. If there's something in the Bible about a story of somebody who lies and it's actually to promote something good, like godly, something that Christians might hold on to, what in the world am I supposed to do with that, right? The wrestling of what these kind of absolutes mean in the midst of the reality of the world. How do we navigate nuance while at the same time, and I'm just going to say this kind of in a straightforward way, without selling out, right? It would, if we're still looking at the 100% no, yes and no kind of template, then it could be seen that once we start to make quote unquote excuses for lying, we've already slid all the way to the, well, we're not even doing that anymore, right? So there has to be a way that we can talk about the nuances of the world without feeling like or experiencing it as giving up, that part of our faith, right? How do we navigate that? And for the last couple of weeks, depending on the week and depending on where the focus has been, we've talked about what it means to look at a text that's been written so long ago, and what does that mean for interrogating it against what we know now to be ethical or oppressive, right? Or anywhere in between. So I really dig that we're going to be able to talk about the story of Rahab today, because it just challenges us to dig deeply into our faith. For me, this is a wonderful example of how I understand the faith of Christianity being strong enough to bear the weight of the reality of human existence. That it's not so fragile that the second we ask a difficult question of it, it breaks apart and falls apart. Now, there are versions of Christianity that do, but I deeply believe that God has created us with reasoning and the way that we understand living our human lives, and how we've been created in the image of God, and how we've been called to co-create a kingdom of mutual shalom. That this faith, should we take it seriously, can hold the weight of the deepest, sharpest interrogation. And that on the other side, or even in the midst of that interrogation, that we find not only a God who is faithful to us and among us, but also the depth of our own humanity that is capable of co-creating such a kingdom. So all that to say, I was wondering if we could start by reading the biblical text and then jumping off from there based on our understandings of the us, them, you know, kind of like the self and the other dynamic that was showing up in the book of Deuteronomy. And then also entering into the book of Joshua, certainly taking seriously the conversations over the last 2 weeks of, you know, what does it mean to exert one's agency? And then what does it mean when the biblical text includes harmful text like that of the ban, the holy war that y'all talked about last week. So could, let's see, 1, 2, could I have 4 volunteers? One to take Joshua chapter 2, 1 through 7. The second person to take 8 through 14. The third person to take 15 through 21. And then the fourth person, 22, and finish. Sister Janine, I see you. Would you take the first one once we get all 4 folks? Sister Janine, the first set, the 1 through 7. Oh, you're on mute, Sister Janine. Are you speaking with me?
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
So we haven't started reading yet, but would you commit to doing 1 through 7?
Okay.
Thank you so much. Sister Linda, thank you. Would you take 8 through 14, please?
8 through 14.
Chapter 1.
I'm sorry. 8,
Josh.
8. Go ahead, say it again.
Joshua. Sure. Joshua 2, verses 8 through 14.
Am I then Joshua 2, 1 to 7?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And 2 other readers, if I could. Brother Carlos, please, 15 through 21. And Sister Leandra, did I see you? Your hand? Yeah, would you finish us up with verse 22 to the end?
What version do you want?
Oh,
I'm using the NRSV translation, but if you know, if we're all looking along, you know, we'll work it out. Oh, here we go. We've got NRSV up on the screen. So if we just read what's up on the screen, then at least the Zoom folks and YouTube folks will be up here. So readers, have at it.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Joshua 2, 1 to 7. Then Joshua, son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go, view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and spent the night there. The king of Jericho was told, "Some Israelites have come here tonight to search out the land." Then the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come only to search out the whole land." But the woman took the 2 men and hid them. Then she said, "True, the men came to me. True, the men came to me, but I did not know where they came from. And when it was time to close the gate at dark, the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you can overtake them." She had, however, brought them up to the roof and hidden them with the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. So the men pursued them on the way to Jordan as far as the fords. As soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm doing 8 through 14.
Yes.
Okay. Before they went to sleep, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, "I know the Lord has given you the land, and that dread of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites that were beyond Jordan, to Sihon and Og, who you utterly destroyed. As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any of us because of you. The Lord your God is indeed in heaven above and on the earth below. Now, then, since I have dealt kindly with you, swear to me by the Lord that you in turn will deal kindly with my family. Give me a sign of good faith, that you will spare my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. The men said to her, our life for yours. If you do not tell this business of ours, then we will deal kindly and faithfully with you when the Lord gives us the land.
Thank you.
Joshua 2:15-21. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the outer side of the city wall, as she resided within the wall itself. She said to them, go toward the hill country, so that the pursuers may not come upon you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward, you may go your way. The men said to her, we will be released from this oath that you have made us swear to you, if we invade the land and you do not tie this crimson cord to the window through which you let us down, and you do not gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers and all your family. If any of you go out the doors of your house into the street, they will be responsible for their own death, and we shall be innocent. But if a hand is laid upon any of you who are with you in the house, we shall bear the responsibility for their death. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be released from this oath that you made us swear to you. She said, according to your word, so be it. She sent them away and they departed. Then she tied the crimson cord in the window.
Thank you.
This is starting with verse 22. They departed and went into the hill country and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers returned. The pursuers had searched all along the way and found nothing. Verse 23. Then the two men came down again from the hill country. They crossed over, came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him all that had happened to them. Verse 24. They said to Joshua, truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before us.
Thank you so much. Okay, here we have it. There's the biblical text of the story of Rahab, and it's set within the story of Joshua, which is set within this history and theology based in the Deuteronomy historian, who is setting up a way of understanding good and evil, good people and evil people, doing right and doing evil, in this very yes or no kind of fashion, right? It's like, if you do good things will happen. If you do evil things will happen. And if you are a good person doing good things, then your strategy will work. And if you're an evil person doing evil things, your strategies will be thwarted. And then the kind of reverse of that starts to play out, where people start to look at the results and then categorize the people, right? If you've got bad results, if things are not working your way, you must be a bad person or not set apart or chosen by God. And if your stuff is working out, it must be because you're a person of God and or you're a good person, right? So this story of Rahab is set within that, in the text, in the biblical text. Now, at this point in 2022, we see all the time where those lines are crossed, where there's disruptions to that very exacting kind of logic. There are good strategic things that happen from folks that are acting some kind of way. And there are horrible things that happen to folks who are acting with integrity. So all that to say that when we talk about this story of Rahab, challenging the kind of, if you do this, then this is definitely going to happen kind of thing, or if this happens, then you're definitely this kind of person, also has to be challenged. So saying all that and hearing the story of Joshua 2, would you in the chat write something that is jumping out to you about the story of Rahab? And if we have anybody who's on the Zoom call, but is also kind of looking at what's going on, you know, in YouTube, if there's any comments coming through there, they can put that in the chat too, because I'll name some of those that are coming through the chat so we can talk about them. But this can kind of get us started. What about the story of Rahab is jumping out for you? Okay, so she is introduced as a prostitute. Yes. And from the very beginning, right? So whoever's writing this wants us to know for sure that this is a characterization of Rahab. What is the importance of her being a prostitute? Right, exactly. She was making a deal to protect her family. With serious strategy too.
Oh, yeah.
Like it wasn't just like, hey, protect my family, right? She was laying it out like, bah, 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 bah.
Right. All right. Yeah.
Any others? All the people melted in fear of the Israelites. Mhm. She is a believer. She believed in God.
Well, and also,
Any others before we jump in? Any concerns about the story of Rahab that jump out for you? She was strategic in what she did to save her family. She was terrified of the Israelites. She sounded like a prophet. Yeah. So let's open up the first part, right? What it's let's see what. Yeah, Rahab is described as a prostitute in verse 1. We don't even get to verse 2. You know how a lot of biblical stories will start, the so-and-so blah, 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 the son of so-and-so, and the kingdom bearer of the candle wick family of something, something. You know what I mean? Like there's all of these big genealogy things that happen about how to, it was the year something, something of the king so-and-so habitat and the blah, 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 right? This one is like, and Rahab, she's a prostitute. What's going on there? The first couple of things were like, she's listed as a prostitute, and what is the significance of her being listed as a prostitute? Does anybody know anything about the text already, or just kind of ways that you're thinking about it?
how were prostitutes looked at?
Oh, you've muted yourself.
I'm
There we go.
assuming prostitutes were looked at as kind of scum.
Kind of what?
Like scum, S-C-U-M.
Oh, okay.
You know,
Negatively.
Right. Is that right to assume that, or was she just another, business person?
Well, that's part of the discussion, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the discussion, because, we could, one of the ways, again, we're not going to be able to dig into every single part of, whatever we bring up today. But part of what biblical studies can do is to look at the original language and then say, okay, why is this word used and not another word, right? So there are studies on the book of Rahab and the character of Rahab that talk about like the initial wording and what did prostitute mean, right? At the very least, even if we're going to talk about it in a general sense, there's some sort of like the descriptor is placing her in an other category. She's listed as an other, someone who lives outside of the parameters that the writer, either the writer or the writer believes the original readers consider not proper, not the way God's folk act, not part of those other folk, right? Because they're already talking about the group of others that live in this land that is of others right now. They're also naming her a prostitute, which is creating another layer of other, right? It's not like, and then they went to a prominent businesswoman's house within the land of those other folks, right? They could have said that, but they didn't. They said prostitute. Now, again, we can dig deeply into like the original term and all that kind of stuff. And there are studies where we could do that. In general, though, this is like a second round of othering that's happening. Where, let's stop right there. Where else in the text is there a clue that she's an other? Where else in the text is there a clue that she's an other? Like not only is she an other, like first round, but she's an other of the others.
Well, if she believed in God, she was a little different than the rest of that group.
Right. Because if the original description or thought process is that this other land that's going to get conquered is full of other non-God believing, non-God set apart folk, and she's believing in God or some sort of alignment where she's trying to align herself with this God, then it is going to be other than her surroundings, like where she's living. So yeah. How about Sister Linda?
You could argue that she prostituted her people.
Say it again, please.
She prostituted her people to give them up to save herself and her family.
Okay, I think I know where you're going there, but say more.
Just the fact that she made this deal with them. She let them come in. She knew that, they weren't supposed to be there, but she knew exactly why they were coming. And she saved them. She could have easily given him up while they were there and they were sleeping and other people could have came in and killed them or whatever. But she was, I would say she was afraid of them and afraid of what she had heard about God. And, in the end, she made a deal to save her family.
Right.
As opposed to the entire community.
I just noticed, then the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab. So the king of Jericho knew her somehow.
Yes.
Somehow.
Yeah, that was apparently he had business with her.
Look.
Entertained by her.
You know what?
But
here's the thing.
All these people coming and she's gathering information. That's probably how she knew what was going on. If all of these men who run things are coming and talking to her, she's gathering information. She's very knowledgeable. Even the king knows about her.
Yeah, but a lot of the people in the community don't value her and think she's smart enough to store this information, and so that's why she shouldn't have any allegiance to her people, because they don't value.
Yeah, so Jericho saw her as a friend in court, so to speak.
Yeah.
Sister Janine, hold on one second. Sister Leandra, say the rest of your thought there. I want to jump on it.
I was saying she probably didn't have any allegiance to her community because they didn't see her as a valued member of the community. And plus they probably didn't think she was smart enough to get information from the gentleman that she was entertaining. And but they did notice she was a resource that any strangers that come to town, she would know of. If they were men, she would know about, because that's her job to get
Look, and so Sister Leandra, she's an other in this community that's described as other by the biblical writer and or the original readers, right? Mm-hmm. She's also, Sister Linda has brought in, like, if this is an act of prostituting, right, selling out her people, been like, hey, then that's a different way that we can think about the word prostitute, right? Prostitute, we've already included many assumptions about the word prostitute in this conversation, right? She's of ill repute, has something to do with sex, she's entertaining, right? We've used all these euphemisms, she's entertaining men, right? But we're thinking like she's doing some sort of sexual activity with men, right? Men, leadership men, whereas somehow, right, the king knows that, you know, maybe she's going to be a contact point for two outside guys who come in, if they're going to come in, right? Then Sister Leandra, you've also brought up this ongoing, consistent assumption that folks make about people that we disregard. Either that they don't hear what we're saying, that because we don't pay them any mind or any value or any respect, then we can say whatever we want, and it's like a chair was in the room, right? And because we disregard their value, we also disregard their intellect.
Sort of like an aide at the White House, would you say, Michelle?
I think that's what you're saying.
Yes, right.
I think what I'm saying is that this always happens. This is a universal thing, that a phenomena that happens when we don't value people. If we don't value people, we will not value anything about them. And it shows up over and over and over again as not respecting what they think, looking at them as if they're an object, right? Literally like a chair. I can say the secret in front of this chair because, you know, it's a chair, right? And then also disregarding at the greatest levels their intellect and abilities, right? There's no way these powerful folks and whoever else were coming through Rahab's spot and believing that Rahab had all that strategy in her, right? And this happens over and over and over again. And if we look throughout history and we look to yesterday, we're going to find plentiful examples of that. Now, this is one of the entry points into dismantling oppressive power, because we can use that, right? If you're going to assume that I don't know anything, I'm not going to tell you I know stuff. I'm not going to show my hand and let you know that this is what my strategy is going to be, or this is what the strategies that I'm thinking about, right? I'm going to take all that, and then especially if I'm being persecuted or oppressed by the folks around me, I'm going to hold it. Because if I got that much strategy, I also know the strategy of timing, right? And that's what Rahab did. She had the strategy of timing. She didn't have to say, you know what, here's this thing. I heard this thing from the king, blah, blah, blah. Can you just give me 48 hours so I can set up the strategy? No, right? The story tells it that, like, when this opportunity presented itself, she was ready. She was like, hey, I got this crimson rope. I got folk. I got things. We're ready to go, right? This is what's coming to my mind right now is how folks talk about the St. George walkout, right? Some people talk about the St. George walkout as if the immediate racism of the white elders ripping the folks up from their knees in the middle of prayer was this like, okay, well, now in response to this one thing, now we're going to make this like on the spot move and do our walkout of St. George Methodist Episcopal Church. Whereas the Black folks had had strategies for a very long time, had been talking about stuff for a very long time. And so when this particular opportunity jumped off, that strategy was ready to go. It was like, well, now's the time, right? It's like for such a time as this. Sister Janine, you can Google St. George walkout and you will see maybe what is the very first official protest in the United States based on race, for sure. And the history of the the African Methodist Episcopal Church. See, that's what I get for doing all the work with the UMC, because then that just rips off my mind.
Well, I'm a little
So,
slower than you are, but I got it. I do remember it.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we also have Dr. Bowling says her home was built on the outer side of the wall.
Yeah.
She wasn't in the town. Say more, Dr. Bowling. I like this.
By the way, the house was built so that the wall was there, but her house was kind of situated so that she was outside. She wasn't part of the city in itself, but everybody knew where she was. I mean, to get to her, they came through the gate, but she was on the fringes, like all of us are. Like we're on the fringe of society. She was on the fringe, and so therefore she was an outcast. But everybody knew where she was.
Right.
But
It's like literal and symbolic, like exclusion, right?
Right.
You are on the outsides of our society, community, the way we wanted folks to think we act, because you said, right? Everybody's already, everybody know where she is, but nobody wants to admit they've been there, right? So with her, there are literary tropes that are happening at the same time, right? There are things that have been included in this story and things that have been excluded. The story would go on forever and ever and ever if every single thing was, in there, right? We got one chapter of Joshua to know about what's going on, right? But the clues, right, are that she's named as a prostitute from verse 1. Then we have like she lives, not only does she live in the wall, which is like, okay, so everybody on the inside is part of this community. Everybody out there is not part of this community, right? But she's on the outside of the wall.
wasn't that kind of strategic? She could have dropped other guys out of those windows too, I mean, I think you could look at it both ways,
She say that last part again.
Because she was had that outside wall, she could drop the guys out and they could get free. She could have done that with a lot of other guys who needed to quote get out,
But that's true, right? Who knows because we don't have the part of the story that says here's all the strategies of how folks were utilizing prostitutes, right? Like when we have engagements, I'm using that word very generally, not even euphemistically. I'm just saying, like, when we have engagements that are seen as being outside of what is acceptable, then we will figure out how to use those engagements, and there will be a whole bunch of strategies around that, right? The folks that know. So like way back in the day, I don't know if there's like some young folks on the call, but like in the midst of, let's say, someone's particular clubbing days or party days, right? There are certain clubs and certain parties that only certain folks know about, right? It's like, the phrase like, if you know, that's this, right? If you know, you might have heard stories that there's a prostitute in a community, right? But if you know, then you also know how to get there. Maybe there's a password, maybe there's whatever, right? There's all sorts of coding and stuff like that, right? If that's the case, then there's going to be a whole set of strategies that folks who are engaging with Rahab know about. Now, because her character, because her vocation is listed as a prostitute, and perhaps her character is being described as a prostitute, then that is gearing up readers, original and otherwise, to start thinking about her in certain ways. That, again, just like Sister Leandra brought up very specifically, there are very specific strategies that she had, right? That if she, one of the things I think about is, like, if she described herself, how would she describe herself? Let's say Joshua 2 was written by Rahab. Would she have described herself as a prostitute? Or would it have been included in a longer list of descriptors for her? Right? There's one of the things that we have to challenge ourselves with as readers in 2022. And this can even get into the conversation of, like, how we understand sex workers today, how we understand agency, how we understand exclusion, all of those different things. Regardless of where we come down on that, right? It doesn't matter. What's important for each one of us, though, is to question how we're getting there, right? Because once the word prostitute happens, it's a loaded term, right? It's a loaded term for us, and it probably was a loaded term for them. So one of the things we have to ask is, what are we loading it with, so that by the time we get to that third stage we talked about, like, what does this mean for us today? We're actually talking about what it means for us today without loaded assumptions that are misguiding us, right? So if we talk about, let's say we, I know, Sister Leandra, I keep pulling back to you, but you brought these really crisp areas of discussion to the forefront. When you talk about her having strategy, and you talk about her intelligence and her agency, like those kinds of things, how might we describe Rahab if we were writing Joshua 2?
I would say she was pretty wise and discerning, and intuitive, to see how she could benefit from this situation.
Yeah, exactly. And okay, so this is just what I'm thinking about, right? For me, if verse 1 starts like that, I have to question myself, am I thinking about this in a totally different way? Because even she lives on the outside of the wall, right? Not only does she live in the wall, which is the barrier between who's us and who's them, right? But she lives on the outside of the wall. If the first thing I know about Rahab is that she's wise and intuitive and strategic, and what was it? There was another, she's smart and cunning, and she created a strategy to protect her family, her whole family. She could have been like, hey, just look out for me. But she didn't. She had a whole strategy for protecting her whole family in case something like this jumped off. If that's the first thing I read about her, and then maybe in verse 22 or something, oh yeah, and by the way, she was a prostitute, right? Or whatever. Then am I thinking about it differently? And if I am thinking about it differently, then I have to check myself, because that's a clue that I'm creating the story around the assumptions that I bring from that descriptor of prostitute. So there's Sister Anne Marie brought in, gee, I wonder why the spies stopped and stayed with the quote unquote prostitute. Yeah, exactly. Sister Anne Marie, where are you?
I'm here. I'm in the flowers.
Oh yes, wonderful, beautiful.
Hi, good afternoon. How is everyone? Yeah, I kind of meant that, that's what came to mind for me. But yeah, I agree with everybody. You guys reading a lot of deepness into Miss Rahab, as the kids say, she was a hoe and everybody knew it. But the question that you all are making me think about was, Okay, so the dudes, the spies, who were they again? Whose sons were they? Were they pure and chased from afar if they stopping at her house first? I mean, if they had all of that going for them, if God made the way and they're the sons of this and that and the other, why didn't they just walk through the gates and say, hey, look, y'all, here's what's happening? No.
Back in that
There's
era,
a lot of stuff we don't know.
Strange men back in that era, they knew she was a person that would open the door for a man, because other women were under the protection of their husband, their brother, or some man that would tell the authorities about them. So they knew that she didn't have to answer to, some husband or a man in her life that would be in line with the soldiers and those kind of people, so. I don't think women could even have a conversation with a strange man back in that era unless they were in her profession or somehow they had to have some man involved,
In that particular culture, maybe, but not necessarily in other cultures. See, what we're looking at is through the lens of patriarchy and how patriarchy has shaped our understanding of this culture at that time. And I agree with you. That
they were rare. They wouldn't know where to find the independent women back in that. They knew she was a woman that
they existed in other cultures, but not in particular, perhaps not in this particular culture, in this region of the world. But see, the idea of the patriarchy is well entrenched in the Western understanding of this canon and how we have received. I think that's why Reverend Michelle is even asking us to discuss Rahab, is because we have this 21st century understanding of the differences between what are called gender roles and how women, as you were pointing out, Sister Leandra, what a woman with her status was enabled to do, or empowered, maybe. I was making light of the fact that they stopped at her house first. But my question then was, were they spying on that particular town? Were they going further into, they're not, what town was she staying in? And what was the significance of them stopping there? That's the part I think I'm not understanding. What is the significance of the spies coming to that particular town?
That's where Joshua told them to go. He told them to go and check out Jericho. That's why they went, because they were told to go there.
The entry point for the city, she was right near, where the gate and all of that stuff was, where you could come into the city.
I also think what Sister Anne Marie is bringing forward too is that when someone is a stranger to a place, right? They're looking for some sort of entry point. So whether that's like a physical entry point, like a gate, right? Or whether that's someone where that entry point can happen. So in this case, it's a woman who would entertain strangers. And when I mean entertain is like open the door, right? That based on the understanding of how patriarchy was functioning, where some women, you couldn't talk directly to a woman. A man couldn't talk directly to a woman. They'd have to talk through her father or her brother or her husband or whoever, right? The person who owned her, of whose property she was, right? So, but the reality is, like, the text also says, like, when she says, hey, I need you to protect my whole family, all of a sudden, like, a father and brothers and all sorts of folks show up, right? So it's not that they weren't there. It's just that however money was being made in that household also included an opportunity for Rahab to have face-to-face conversations, at the very least, engagements with other people. So that's being broken into. Now, if we take Sister Anne Marie's comment further and say, if this had been in a different spot, if their if their governmental structures or whatever else had been set up differently, it could be that the king of Jericho was the queen of Jericho, right? And then it could be that if they went to start with a political engagement, then they would have tried to figure out, okay, who is the queen, so that we can engage politically with the highest political leader of the land. So if we look at the engagement with Rahab as an entry point, what they're saying is, we do not want, at this point, the spies do not want to engage with the highest political leader. They want to engage with someone with whom they can get away with spying. And they say, I'm going to look for somebody who this community is already shunning, who has access to knowledge of what's going on in this community, and we've got in and out privileges, whether that's through the outside window, outside the gate, so we don't have to show ourselves within, or whether that's sneaking through this particular place, because most likely there are ways to get to the prostitute that aren't visible by everything. It's not just out and out, right? It's down like some alley somewhere or blah, 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 because the only way you know is if you know. Otherwise, everybody in the town, city, is going to know who's visiting, who's frequenting Rahab's house. And there are folks who are still trying to keep that under wraps. So we've got two spies who come into the town saying, you know, we've got this job that God has given us, right? Because we're going to come take this land. And the easiest entry point that we can find is Rahab the prostitute's house. And we're going to go there. Now, it nowhere says we're going to go to her because we understand that she's got serious strategy, right? It's very likely that the two spies are also underestimating Rahab. Because when Rahab comes out with her strategy of how she's like, look, I'll do this if y'all do this, she's got a whole thing laid out. So much so that the two spies then have to respond with their own strategy, right? There is like a whole section where they're like, look, if you don't put the red rope out, it's not our fault. Look, if your folks aren't in the place, we can't look. How are you going to hold us responsible for knowing the difference between this person is in your family and this person is just part of like the overarching, you know, holy war ban that we're supposed to, you know, enact on Jericho right now. So you gave us a strategy, but now we've got to deal with you like we would a political leader. We had no idea this was going to happen, but here we are. So again, we only have a couple of minutes left. It's I think that the majority of our time has kind of been peeling back our assumptions, right? At the very least, to ask ourselves, what assumptions are we placing within the text before we even get to what does this mean for us, right? I started the time talking about like this all or nothing kind of like, is it okay to lie? Right? Like, because that's one of the things that kind of comes on the table, at least at one level, about this text, right? She's lying. And, you know, I can't imagine that anybody who's taught Sunday school is going to go into your class of Sunday schoolers, be like, hey, let's read Joshua 2 so we can figure out how to lie, right? That usually doesn't show up that way. But if we take that and other areas of this text seriously, and start to ask ourselves, how do we make decisions of morality? How do we know that we're making a decision that is honorable? Honorable to our own humanity, honorable to the humanity of those around us, and honorable in the sense that we've been created in the image of God, and that we've decided to be disciples of, you know, Jesus. Right? Like, what is it? If it can't be just, well, just never lie, then how do we make those decisions? And does this chapter, does the story of Rahab help us to do that in any way? Any thoughts about that?
One word about family, I believe, as I understand, the culture there, families were the absolute foundation, and families lived together, you know, one floor, they would build houses, first floor, second floor, third floor for generations. So her care for the family was really, you know, a terribly important thing, as I understand, you know, what we've been talking about, that she was really obligated to take care of that family and to save it. That's just
Right. Okay. So let's take
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
So,
I met a guy
if
in,
we well, wait 1 second, because we only have a couple minutes, because
That's
so
okay.
I want to focus right in the text, right? You're saying she has an obligation to her family, right? But she's already making decisions that are different than the societal norms or the societal okayness
well,
of Jericho, right? Of the city of Jericho and the original readers, right? The set apart folks of God, right? She's already making that decision, but then she does decide, like, so she's got one thing that's like kind of outside of societal culture, then she's got another thing that's deeply within societal culture, then she's got the lying part, then she's got the I'm going to support the folks that are coming in to conquer, right? Which is against the self-other kind of initial drive. So in the last 3 minutes, is there anybody else who wants to jump in maybe there? How do we decide?
well, when it comes to family,
Well, Sister Janine, hold on. Let's have some other folk jump in.
I'd like to say,
Sorry.
what obligation do, it depends on who asks the question. For example,
Okay.
if my parents asked me, did you steal that candy bar down at the drugstore? Then I think I would have an obligation. When you were 10 years old, I probably have an obligation to them. But if somebody on this place right now asks me, have you ever stolen a candy bar? Do I have an obligation to say yes or no? It depends on who asked the question, and in my opinion.
okay.
Yeah, so Brother Charles, if we look at the text specifically about that, right? And we're saying that she is lying on behalf of the folks that are coming in to conquer, but not on the folks that she lives amongst on a day-to-day, then that means that she sees her obligation more so toward those who would conquer the folks around her than the folks that she actually lives side by side. And there's probably reasons for that, right?
Yes.
That's good. That's good. Anybody else? Because we only have like a minute and then we're going to jump off. This is good.
I would just say,
Yeah.
with my Sunday school class, we would have to have a conversation about lying. And is it okay to lie? Because people do lie for various reasons, like Charles was saying, you know, and depending on the circumstances,
Right.
yeah, it matters.
Supposed to ask
Now,
what was-
it's not the best thing to lie, but you know, there are times when it's necessary,
Yes,
you know, for some reasons. A bunch of police came down the street and were just chasing
Look,
after some kids, and they had guns out, and I didn't see the kids had any guns.
look.
I might direct them in another direction, you know.
Okay.
But
Exactly.
you know, because
Mhm.
I would know, you know, there was probably more harm would come the other way.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to add this one last thing before we jump off. The way humans make decisions. This has nothing to do with the particular decision that folk are making. This is literally just the way we make. This is like a phenomena of humanity. This is the way our brains work, right? Whatever is the most important thing, whatever is the thing that we value the most, that's where we're going to make a decision for that thing. So whatever the underlying value is, whatever the importance of the person is, whoever's asking the question, right? Whatever the thing is that we value the most, do we value, right? So in Sister Linda's example, do you value the external authority of the police officers, or do you value protecting the lives of the children running down the street that you see unarmed, right? Which is it? Is it external authority, or is it the lives of the children, right? Whatever that is, it's not as simple as just follow the rules or this is what blah blah blah. We always make decisions based on whatever the prioritized value is. And if we start thinking about our decisions that way, then even when we're making a decision differently than someone else or absolutely counter to whatever the set of rules are that govern our lives, we can articulate why we're making the decision that we're making. And that means that even in the face of deep resistance or pushback against us, we can still feel confident in what we're saying until, we reevaluate or think again about what we're doing or stand firm in it. Whew. It's 1:02, folks. Thank you all so much for being part of the story of Rahab today and part of this set apart group for this work of seeking God and what God might have for us in a 60-minute period.
And I want a candy bar, Charles.
Oh, what candy bar? Somebody's like, right. As soon as we start talking about candy bars.
I didn't steal the candy bar. It was a Pepsi.
I've already got the.
Answer only the questions asked.
That's hilarious. Brother Charles, would you do us a favor and to pray us out of this session together?
If I can get myself together.
Oh, I believe